Okay, so let's open up our file window, our Windows File Explorer, and we're going to go to the desktop to our import files again. And now we have an extras folder. I ended up creating our final car prefab by combining these two cars that we have. So the one from the standard assets and the one that we got from the muscle car asset package. So we double click on that. We'll get those prefabs that I created, and we can just import those. You can take a look at what I created and kind of compare and contrast against the other two cars if you want to see kind of how it's created. But I could also, if you guys wanted, on the video that I'm making, I could kind of go through that and show how I created it. It's kind of a little bit complicated, and that's why I didn't really want to show it. It might get confusing, but it might be useful to see later on if you guys wanted to do that. So you guys can let me know if that's something you do want to see in the video. But we can go now to our assets, and then our prefabs, and then we should see our cars here that got imported. So you can select whichever car you want. And I'm going to select the other ones and delete them. So I'm just going to click on each car and then just hit the delete key. So we should have our player's car underscore whatever kind that we wanted. So I've got player car underscore flames. And I'm just going to position it a little bit farther from this ball. And we can save and test. And see that our camera that we set up isn't following this car anymore, because remember we had it following the standard assets car. So we need to change this multi-purpose camera rig so it follows our new car now. So let's select the multi-purpose camera rig, and we'll scroll down in the inspector, and we'll see that the AutoCam component target says none. So we need to give it something to follow. So let's drag our player car onto the target box. If we save and test, it should drive around now, and we follow our new car. So now our muscle car drives around, and we've added the way to control it. Okay, so we've kind of got the basics of how this thing works, how the user is going to interact with it, and a lot of times that's how game developers will create their games. So you'll start with how the player interacts with it. So you'll start with just the creating the player character, the main character of the game inside of an empty world, and just make sure that that movement or whatever the player is doing feels good, because you want that kind of base of your game to be enjoyable. And then you build the rest of the game around that core interaction. But what we want to do now is start getting into level design. So in level design of a game, you have your artists who create your textures and materials and prefab components. So you'll have pieces of levels and props and things that you can make a world with. And then your designers will go and they'll use all those little pieces to go and create a fully fleshed out world. So what I've done is I've created some of those prefabs and stuff, and then so now what we're going to do is build our little stadium out of those prefabs. So let's go back to our import files. We're going to go to 3 environments, and we'll import that package in. And just import everything. So once that's done importing, you should see in your prefabs this new environment folder. If we click in there, we see these walls and a scoreboard and a pitch. I'm going to zoom out away from my car. First I'm going to click on my car and focus on it with F, and then I'm going to zoom away from it so I kind of get a big view of our overall space here. And now I'm going to click and drag this wall out and just put it somewhere. And it doesn't really matter where it is, but kind of put it off to the side so that the place that it's facing is kind of toward the car, but kind of far away from it. You can look at my screen here, how I have it. It doesn't have to be exact. So we're gonna use a bunch of walls like this in succession to build kind of our stadium. So we're gonna use this prefab, reuse it, and from this we can create kind of all sorts of different shapes and sizes of stadiums. But for us, we're gonna do something together here. We're gonna try and make it all the same size, just so everyone's on the same page. Let's just drag out another wall, and we'll try and put it next to that wall that we have. Now, you'll notice we want to try and kind of line these walls up. But that gets kind of tedious if we're trying to use these arrows and trying to like eyeball it and position it. We could get more fine-tuned if we went with the numbers and start like calculating the exact numbers that they're supposed to be at. But there's actually an easier way. If we have one of the walls selected, make sure you can see 2 walls next to each other here, kind of like how I have it. And with one of them selected, and you have your move tool selected as well up in the top left corner. As long as those 2 are selected, I can hold V down, and you'll see how like this arrow gizmo starts jumping around all over this game object as I'm moving my mouse over it. And that's showing me which vertices of the game object I can select. So all these little points, if you can see this, the green kind of lines overlaid on this game object, every point of those lines I can select, and I can move it around, and I can actually snap it to another vertice on a different game object. So what I've done here is I've held V, and I'm going down so that down over here in this area, so that I'm using this very corner vertice of the wall. And I'm going to click and drag that corner vertice, and I'm going to hover over the very corner of the next wall. And so you want to make sure that you have a good view of what you're working with. So a lot of times I'll drag out a wall, put it kind of in the general spot, and then I'll press F to focus on it. And then I'm going to do the V snap to snap it to the next wall. So we want to do that so we have 6 of those walls in a row. So I'm going to keep going here. I'm going to drag out a wall, F to focus on it, hold V, click and drag on the corner and snap it to the next wall. Okay, so we all got 6 walls here. Let's drag out one of these corners. So wall corner prefab, and we're going to bring it to one side of our wall, and we're going to do the same thing. Grab one of the little corners there with the V tool, snap it so that it's in line with our other walls. And now we're going to go to the other side of the wall and drag another one. This time we have to rotate it. So we're going to go over to our transform component, and in the Y, so rotation Y, we're going to change that from 0 to 90. And then select the game object and snap it. Okay, so now on that corner, we're going to, let's zoom in on that corner again. So F to zoom, and we're going to put another straight wall. So drag out another straight wall, and we're going to rotate this one by 90 again. And snap it with V. And we're only putting one straight wall there, because the next one we're going to use is this wall goal prefab. So I'm going to drag out this wall goal, and now this one's a little bit more complicated, but it's the same basic idea. We're going to rotate this one 90 again, and V to snap it. And then on the other side of that wall, just another straight wall. And 90. And snap it. Okay, so if we zoom out and look at the whole thing, we see we basically have half of our stadium built. If we took all of this and rotated it 180, we'd have a full thing. So let's see if we can try and do that. But first, what we're going to do, see how in our hierarchy now we've made all these changes, and it's starting to look pretty like messy and cluttered up here. So we want to put all these walls together inside of another game object, so it kind of almost like a folder, so it like kind of keeps it more tidy. So let's go up to the top here in hierarchy, the hierarchy create menu, and we'll create empty. And let's rename this environment. For all your walls here, let's make sure they're all collapsed, so you don't see all the little things inside of them. Make sure they're all collapsed. And now you should have all of your walls all in a line. So let's click on one of them, and like at the very top, and then shift click on the wall that's at the very bottom, and you should see all of your walls selected in the scene area. So once we have all these blue, let's click and drag them onto our environment game object. So now we're able to collapse this game environment game object, and it makes our hierarchy nice and tidy. Okay, so now we want to duplicate these game objects. So select the top wall, shift select down to the bottom one, make sure they're all collapsed, so you're not selecting any of the children. And now we're going to right click on that blue space and select duplicate. So now we've basically duplicated that whole thing, and now we want to rotate them. So let's click on the rotate tool at the top, making sure we have all these walls still selected. And if I start to rotate, you'll see that they all kind of rotate by themselves. And they're not doing exactly what I want them to do. They're all kind of rotating around their own axis. So what we can do, I'm going to go Control Z to undo the rotation I just did. But I can also go to Pivot at the very top next to the control buttons up here. If I click on this Pivot button, that'll change it to center. And now when I rotate, you'll see all of them will rotate around the center of where they are. So what I can do is just rotate this, all of these objects together, but I do want to get them exact. So what I can do is while I'm rotating them, I can hold down Control, and that'll kind of snap it to certain degrees of rotation. So we'll be able to snap this rotation to absolute values. And then you can do the V snap. Okay, so we have our kind of walls set up, and they have these curved angles, so we can drive up and drive along the wall and do some funny little tricks. But we want to change this ground so it's not this boring white box. So let's just click on this white ground and just delete it. And we'll drag our pitch prefab component out of our prefabs, the green one. And let's, once you drag it in there, it's probably going to be in the wrong place. Let's go to transform, the gear menu, and then reset position. And that's going to snap it down to where the ground is. I think we're going to need to rotate it. So let's go change the rotation Y to 90. And now let's just position it somewhere where it makes sense. I'm going to show you kind of a shorthand way of editing a position. So you see how, like, on my screen, if I'm moving this pitch, I can move it in this direction with this arrow, or I can move it in this direction with this arrow. But I can move them in both directions if I grab this square on the bottom. And now I'll be able to kind of position it more easily along this plane. It's not going to move up or down, it's just going to move side to side and in the plane that I want it to be. So I'm going to position it so it kind of covers the ground inside the play area. We're going to leave the scoreboard prefab there for a little bit. We'll come back to that later. But for now, we can save and test and just see how it plays with the soccer ball and the car. Okay, so one thing you may have noticed is that I mean, the ball kind of since the beginning, it's kind of like it uses physics now. It kind of falls, but it doesn't act like a ball where, like, if a soccer ball were to drop there, it would probably bounce up, but ours just kind of like lands and just stays there. What we want to do is change how the physics works on that ball to make it behave a little bit better, so it's a little bit more interesting when we go and hit it. So we're going to change how bouncy it is. So the way we do that is we create a physics material and put it on our sphere collider of the soccer ball. So let's, we're going to create, this is a new asset type, so let's go back out to our assets. And we're going to create a new folder. and we'll call it Physics, capital P. And then inside that folder, we're going to right-click, Create, and then down near the bottom, Physic Material. And we're going to change this to Bouncy, capital B, Bouncy. And now if we select this, we see some options in the inspector. We want to change bounciness to 0.8. So it's going to be pretty bouncy. This thing goes from 0 to 1. So 1 would be like just like really bouncy. We want it pretty bouncy. And then this bounce combine at the bottom, we'll change it to maximum. And that just means that it will bounce no matter what it hits. And now to apply it to our soccer ball, we're just going to select our soccer ball in the hierarchy. Scroll down till you see the sphere collider. And then we're going to click and drag on bouncy and drag our bouncy thing into the material where it says Physic Material. So that's going to make our ball bouncier. Let's move on. We're going to try and get into a little bit of coding. So let's go back out to our environment, or the import files, sorry. And there's another one for scripts. Number 4, scripts, and we'll just import that one into our project. And don't import the soccer ball. If you do, that's okay. If you imported it, let's go back to, or let's go to our assets, and then to scripts, and then you'll find soccer ball in there. Just right click on it and delete it. I didn't import the soccer ball, so you should see this. Game manager, player car, resettable, score, speed. Let's take a look at one of these scripts. So I'm going to click on the resettable, and you'll see in Unity, in the inspector, we get kind of a view of what this code looks like. And if I double click on it, it actually should open in Visual Studio. So we're just going to kind of look at this code and just kind of see what it does. So I've created these scripts. They're commented pretty extensively, trying to make them easy to understand. So all of those green lines are things that are comments, things that I've kind of put to give you guys hints what they do, if you guys wanted to go through it on your own. But what we're basically what this resettable component does, we'll go through it line by line here. At the top we have some other code that we're using in this for our code. We need to use these using statements. As we go down, we'll see this resettable class. So that's basically saying I'm creating this new component here. And then inside of that, we've got spawn location and spawn rotation. So we're saving a position and a rotation. And then down some more, we've got rigid body. This is a reference to the rigid body component like we have on our soccer ball or our car. And then down some more we have reset input axis. We'll get to that in a second here, but for now we're just going to keep going down to the start. So this function will go at the start of the game. So anything inside this code block, when the scene first loads up and starts, it's going to do this start function, anything in here, and it's going to go and get the rigid body component that's on this game object. And this game object is just whatever we put this script on. So we can put the script on anything. and it's going to get another component, or it's going to get the location of the the position of the transform component and the rotation of the transform component, and save those. And then so then down some more, we have this update function. When you make code, this is going to happen every frame of the game. So it's going to be constantly running over and over again. So any code we put in here is going to, we want to update constantly. So basically in here, it's just looking for if we're getting input from the player to reset, and if that's true, then we're going to reset this game object. So if you remember, we've saved the location and rotation of where it starts out, and then we're going to reset there if the player tells us to. So this code is basically something we're doing to, if we accidentally fly off the edge of the world or flip ourselves over, we can't get back, we can press a button and this code will reset the car back to its starting location and rotation. And then down further we have that the function that actually does that is the reset function. And then we have more functions down below that. One of them, reset after seconds, that will after a few seconds it will call that same reset function. And then on the bottom is destroy function that will cancel anything we're doing if this game object is destroyed. And that's just really that's just in case things are if we're doing anything else with our game object. So that's basically what this code does. And you see, it's coded in a way that is reusable. It's modular. This can be put on the car to reset the car. It can be put on the ball to reset the ball. It's not locked into any one specific game object. I've made it so that all it has to have is this rigid body component and a transform component, which all game objects have transform components. And that's all it needs. And if you press a button, it will reset the position and rotation. So let's try and use it. So let's go back to Unity, go down to the bottom. We have our Unity icon, and let's drag this resettable component onto our player car game object. We can also click on the game object itself and drag the resettable code onto the area where we have components. So you're adding a new component by just dragging it on. Okay, so let's just look over at this resettable component now. We see this little the resettable, and we see one option here, reset input axis. Now if you remember our code, if we look at our code here, we have this public string reset input axis equals submit. On line 18 it should be. And so by making it public, that first keyword there, I've enabled that variable so that it appears in our inspector here. So this is the same thing as that code line right there. In our inspector, it says reset input access, and it has submit as the default value. So you see how the code that I wrote there has been converted in Unity for the component. So I've set a default value in the code, but we could change this value in the Unity inspector. Now the other thing you'll see is that this resettable component has the little white page next to the check mark, next to the name. There's this little plus sign. And that's because we've added it to our game object, but it's not part of the prefab. Just like how the bolded values, we have to apply it to the prefab. So I'm going to right-click on that little plus sign, or on the name, and then added component near the top, and I'm going to apply it to prefab. So it's saying, what should I do about this component that we've added? And you're saying we want to apply it to the prefab. So that code I wrote is saying it wants this input axis of submit. And I was saying how we're waiting for the player to press a button. So what does that mean, this input axis? So let's go, I'll show you what input axes are by looking at all the ones available, or that are actually already in our game. Our game is already waiting for the player to press certain buttons. So let's go to Edit, Project Settings, and then you should select the input value on the left. And now you'll see we've got input axes. And that makes sense to what we were just looking at here. And if we drop down that, we'll see all these different values here. So if you've played games, you'll know that a lot of times they give the player the ability to change the input. So like you say, oh, I don't want to have this input as like a mouse click. I want that to be spacebar or something. So you have ways of customizing the keyboard setup or the mouse setup, what the buttons map to. So those are your button mappings. So that's basically what these input axes are. And if you remember, we said it was submit in our resettable. So let's go down to near the bottom of the list here. There's two submit options. Let's open them up both. We'll just look at what they both are. We're not interested in all these different things. That's kind of out of the scope of what we're learning right now. But just look at the positive button value. So if you need to make this window bigger, you can grab the edge of it and drag it. So you'll see that in one of our submit things, the positive button says return, and in the other one, the positive button says enter. So that's basically, they're pretty much the same button, right? Enter and return. It just sometimes some keyboards have return, or Macs use return, Windows uses enter. So that's basically taking care of that. So if you put it all together now, the resettable is waiting for us to press a button. It says we want the submit axis, and Unity is saying when the user presses enter, that is the submit axis. So basically, when user presses enter, it will reset our car. Now, there's another option here in this second submit one that says Alt positive button. So that's the alternate button. So a lot of times you can set more than one button to do the same thing in games, right? This says space. So spacebar will also do it. We actually want to change this because we want the spacebar to do something else later on. So let's just delete space, so it's empty. Okay, and then we can close our submit thing. Close this window. Now let's save and test, and we should see that after we drive around a little bit, then when we hit enter, it should snap us back to where we started. So you'll be able to look more at the code I wrote to see how it exactly does that, but that's kind of the basics of how you use user input and how you use how the code works in Unity's inspector. The ball also, we can lose the ball forever, so let's add our resettable component to the ball. So we'll exit out of play mode. Let's try something else here. Let's select our soccer ball, and now we're going to go over to the inspector. Underneath, at the very top, underneath the name and where it says untagged, there's a prefab option there, and it says open or select. So I can, if I click the select, it's going to jump us to our project view where we have our prefab stored. And then if I can select open prefab from there, or I can select our soccer ball and select the open button from that option. So if I open our prefab using one of those buttons, now we have our soccer ball all alone by itself. I think some of you may have seen this accidentally earlier, but this is our prefab, kind of without anything else cluttering up the view. And we can now make any changes we want to this soccer ball. And we don't have to do all that annoying stuff of right-clicking, apply to prefab every time we make a little change we want to change. So now, this is the way that you normally want to work with prefabs when you're editing them, is you'll open them up, and then you'll make all your changes, and you don't have to apply any of them. So now from here, once we're in our soccer ball prefab, let's go back to our assets and scripts. And we'll select our soccer ball from the hierarchy and scroll down and drag our resettable script. You might need to, drag it to where you see the blue line. And we're just going to leave it with submit as well. So when you hit enter, it should reset. But if you wanted to, you could see how it would be easy to change the button you want by looking at what the input axes are. So now we want to use, we want to detect when we score a goal, right? This is kind of the main point of this game here. We want to be able to score goals and have that count. So let's figure out how we do that. Let's just start to do stuff, and we'll figure out how that relates in a bit. If you click on this scenes button, or if you look over here on my screen, there's this soccer ball in the hierarchy. There's a little back arrow next to that. You can click that, and that will take you back out to the main scene as well. So when you're in a prefab, you want to go back, you can click on either of those. So now let's select one of our goal areas, because we're going to add the functionality of detecting when the soccer balls come in there. So we're going to open that prefab. So select the open button. So now we're editing this prefab by itself. And we're going to add a new collider here. Let's right click, or you can go create from the hierarchy menu. And we're just going to create an empty game object. We're going to rename it goal trigger. So make sure we have our position at 0, 0, 0. If it's not, reset the position using the gear menu. If it's at 0, 0, 0, you're good. Now we're going to go add component and search for collider, or you can or you can type in box, because we're going to be finding a box collider. Now we're going to change the size and position of this collider. So where it says center and size, we're going to change those values. So where it's center X, we're going to put to -15. Center Y, 7. The Z we're putting at 0. So center Z is 0. And then we're going to go down to the next one. So this X will be 15. Size Y will be 14. And size Z will be 23. So now you see we have this box that kind of contains the area of where you might think we should be scoring goal if we go into that area. It's a little bit offset inside, so you might think it's a little bit too far deep into it, but it's because we're going to be checking for when the ball touches that box, not when but we want kind of the ball to be fully inside the goal. So if it just kind of touched the outside edge of it, we want it to be that edge to be further in. This is basically how we detect for when something comes in contact with something. Now, if you think about it, right, if we just left it as is, what's going to happen is actually the ball's going to hit an invisible wall and bounce off, right? Because we've learned that colliders are what make things hit each other and stop moving. But we want to actually use this to detect when the balls come into it. So what we can do is just change this is trigger. If we check that will stop it from being a physical solid object, and it will be an object that lets things pass through it, but it's going to keep track of all the things that pass through it. So we can reference that in the code or other spots of our game. So that's how we can detect when something goes somewhere. Now the last thing we want to do is we're going to, at the very top, underneath the name goal trigger, we're going to change the tag from untagged, and we're going to go down to the bottom and say add tag. So we're creating a new category of object, and this can be anything we want, anything that we want to reference in the code. So we're going to go, you'll see this tags list is empty. Let's click on this plus arrow, or plus sign. We're going to create a new tag, and we're going to call it capital G goal. And then save. So now if we go back to our hierarchy, click on the goal trigger. Now let's go back to that tag thing, and now you'll see that we have goal as an option, and we can select that. And so now we've categorized this trigger, we've created a trigger and we've categorized it. So now we can reference that in the code. We're going to create a we're going to write our own code for this one, because we're going to put this on our soccer ball, and the soccer ball is going to detect when it's gone into this trigger, and we're going to see how that code works. Okay, so let's go back to our scripts folder, and you'll see we have a few scripts here. Let's actually take a look at one of these here. This is going to be important to us when we're creating our script here. There's this gear one that's kind of different from the others. If we select it, we see it says GameManager.cs at the very bottom. That says that it's a C# file, so it's actually the same as these other four. But because we called it Game Manager, Unity changed the icon to this gear, because a lot of times you'll create a Game Manager script, and that's going to be the one that you use to kind of central to your game, and it's a special one that is controlling your game mechanics. Let's create a game object in our hierarchy. We're going to create it empty. And we're going to rename it Game Manager. And then we're going to drag our Game Manager. Let's select it and drag our Game Manager into the inspector components. So our Game Manager has this little list thing here. You'll see on goals scored, list is empty. So this is what you call an event. So in coding, you'll have things that are events where you want your code in your game to know when something happens, and so you'll have certain parts of your code that listen for these events. An event could be a mouse click, or an event could be something else happening like our goal scored. So I've created this event where the game manager is going to send out this message to everyone saying we've scored a goal, and we're going to be able to use that to do a bunch of different things. But the game manager we need to tell the game manager that we've scored a goal for the game manager to tell everyone else. So we have to tell this game manager that we scored a goal with our script that we're going to create. So let's go back down here to our project, view it, our scripts folder, and let's right-click, create a C# script. And we're going to rename it to soccer ball, capital S, capital B, no spaces. We're getting into where the way you write things and capitalize things actually really matters now. It's not just to make it easily recognizable. The code actually needs to be in the right case, and you need to have the exact writing. So let's double click on this soccer ball to open it up in Visual Studio. So you'll see Unity starts you out with some things already pre-built. You have that list of things that you need to use at the very top. Those are kind of the general ones to create all the basics. And then it created your class, that is your component, the same name as what we gave it when we created our new C# file. And then we have our start function and update function, and it tells you that what those two functions do. We are actually not going to use those start and update functions because we're not going to be doing anything at the start of the game or on every frame. We're going to be doing something when we enter into that goal trigger, right? So that when the soccer ball, it has its collider on our soccer ball. When that collider passes into that goal trigger that we created, the goal trigger will automatically call a different function that's not start or update. So let's select everything everything from line 7 to line 17, and just delete that. So now we have this empty class soccer ball, and now let's start typing. We're going to type in void space on trigger, no spaces, and you should see a list pop up, and it says on trigger enter is automatically highlighted. Just press enter, and you'll see that Visual Studio has auto-generated this function for you. So on trigger enter is going to be called automatically on our soccer ball when it goes into that goal trigger. because we set it to a trigger and all the triggers are going to be doing that. But our soccer ball doesn't know what trigger we're going into. We could have if you think about it, we could have lots of different triggers in our world that do different things. So we need to narrow down what it is. So let's start typing here. This function gives us this parameter that says other. So the soccer ball is going to know it's going to have a reference to the other collider, which is our goal trigger. So let's type in other dot, and then we're going to type in tag equals, and then another equals, or we have to do a space equals, sorry. And then space, and then we're going to do double quotes. And I think Visual Studio should automatically put 2, so now your cursor is right in the middle of these 2 double quotes. And then type in capital G goal. So if you remember, we had made our tag, we had created that tag for our goal, and we told it to be goal. So now we can see how we can reference that and say, okay, well, what trigger are we hitting? And we say, oh, well, we only care about any trigger that's tagged with goal. And then we actually want to go to the beginning of that line. So in front of other, we want our code to actually check. We want to say, are we hitting this? Is this the name of this other object goal? So type in if, and then open parentheses. And then at the end of the line, type in close parentheses. Now we're going to type open curly bracket. So the one next to P will go shift that one. And you'll see it gives us 2 of those curly brackets with our cursor between them. Now we can press enter, and it should automatically format it so that we're kind of typing code inside there. So this is our code that says, okay, on trigger enter, when we go inside another trigger, check if the other collider is tagged with goal, and if it is, now we're going to tell our game object that we've scored a goal. Remember, the game object is wanting somebody to tell it that a goal is scored, so the soccer ball will do that. And we'll do it by typing in game manager with capital G. It should auto-highlight that name, and it should also turn kind of bluish green when you do that. And now dot instance, and it should also automatically show you the value for that, and it should be a capital I instance. And then we can go dot goal scored. You can hit enter, and now we're going to go open parentheses, closing parentheses, and semicolon. So now that should be our code complete. The soccer ball is detecting when it's hitting this trigger. It's checking if the trigger is a goal, and then it says, okay, it is a goal, so now we've scored a goal. Tell the game manager that that's what we've done. So go Control S to save this. And now we can go back to Unity, and you should see at the very bottom right corner there's like this little spinny wheel. That's saying that Unity is loading these changes. And once that is complete, Unity's done compiling this code, and we can work with it now. Okay, so let's go select our soccer ball, and we're going to drag our soccer ball code we just created, this soccer ball C# script, onto the component area where we get a blue line. So now that code is now on our soccer ball. If we save and test this, it's not going to actually do anything because it's telling the game manager, hey, we scored a goal, and the game manager is saying, oh, okay, thanks, and then nothing happens. So we actually want something to happen when the game manager is told that a goal is scored. So let's go back, select our game manager in our hierarchy. So the reason why nothing's going to happen is because this list is empty. On goal scored, it's not doing anything. So let's make something happen. Let's click this plus sign. And now let's drag our soccer ball onto where it says none object. And now this is going to call some function on it. Let's select no function and let's figure out what we want it to do. Well, one thing we can do is reset it. Remember, we had created that resettable script that resets it on when we press a button. Well, we can also call a function on there from here. So let's go to resettable and then reset after seconds float. And so that's going to tell our soccer ball to reset after a certain amount of seconds. So now we can say, okay, soccer ball reset and change this 0 to 3. So when we score a goal, the soccer ball will kind of stay in the goal a little bit, and then after 3 seconds, it's going to reset back to the starting position. Let's do another one here. Let's do the plus sign again. And this time we're going to drag our player car from the hierarchy onto that none object. And then with no function, we're going to do the same thing, resettable, reset after seconds, but this one will just do 2 seconds. So if we save and test, let's see, try and score a goal. If it's too hard, you might need to reposition your ball and car from the start so you can score easier. So you should see after it goes into the goal, and after a little while it resets you back to the start. What I've done to make it easier for me is we can go through this right now. I'm going to select the ground, the green pitch, and then I'm going to press F. And so now I have like this really far view of it. Now I'm going to, if you look up over here on the top right of your scene view, you'll see this little gizmo. I want to click on this, the middle box, and that's going to change us to isometric view, so we get rid of the perspective. And we're going to now click on this Y, this green triangle. And now we have this top view of our stadium, kind of like, it's almost like a map view. So now if we zoom in, we can select our car, and we can now like kind of position this so that it makes a little more sense. Like I want it to start in the middle of the pitch, or maybe not the middle, but like on one side, but in the middle of it horizontally. And I'm going to take the soccer ball and I'm going to move it like kind of into the very middle. And I can also check if they're aligned. I can like bring the soccer ball close to my car and kind of make sure they're like both in line. And then I can like drag it away from the car to the middle of the pitch. If you have the ball too high, it might be like bouncing and you might drive underneath it. So if that's the case, you can drag your ball downward you can click on the middle box again on that gizmo. So that's going to put it back into perspective. And now we can rotate around the same as we were. We can select your soccer ball, and then we'll hit F to zoom in on it. And now click on X, this red triangle, and let's just drag that green arrow down a bit. So now it's not going to bounce so much. So now they're going to be a lot more lines. So if I play, all I have to do is just drive forward, and I should be able to hit that ball into the goal. And I'm not going to be like chasing after the ball trying to get this thing. So we see that I get reset and the ball gets reset. All right, so let's move on to let's see how we make UI. So user interface, buttons, ways of the player to click on things or see information displayed to them. So things that can be outside of the game world. The way that Unity does that is with what's called canvases. So let's just create one and see how this works. So we're going to go to the hierarchy, create, and then we're going to go down to UI, and then down to canvas. And you'll see that it's created this canvas game object, but it's also created this event system game object. This event system, we're not going to worry too much about it. It's just something that the canvas needs to track certain things. But if you have a game that you're making and you suddenly have this event system game object and you don't know where it came from, it's because you created a canvas. So we're going to actually select our canvas game object, and you'll see up here it has this rect transform. So that's interesting. That's different from what we've seen before, where we've seen this. We're used to this transform component that has position, rotation, scale, but this one has some extra stuff to it, and that's basically because this canvas is a rectangle, and it has extra functionality to kind of deal with the fact that it's going to be on a person's screen, and we'll see what that means later. We have our canvas selected. Press F to focus on it. You'll see it's this giant rectangle in the sky. So why is this thing like way over here and huge? Well, we'll see what. Let's experiment a little bit here. We're going to add something to our canvas and see what happens. So let's right-click on our canvas in the hierarchy, and we will say go down to UI, and then we'll go up to the top. It says text. We'll create text, and you might be able to see it says new text in the middle of your canvas. So we've created this text box. Let's save and test. So now we should see there's just this new text that's just sitting in the middle of our screen, and no matter where we go, no matter what we do, it's just going to be sitting there in the middle of our screen. So that's the way that canvas works. Even though it's huge and up in the sky, it's still just going to map directly onto the player's screen when they're playing it. So what we're going to do with this, we're going to just give a little feedback to the player to show how fast the car's going. We're going to give a little speedometer. So let's change kind of the values of this text. So make sure we have this text selected. Let's rename this to speedometer, speedometer. And let's scroll down on the component view, and we'll see we have this text component. So this kind of looks familiar. If you've used like Microsoft Word or something, you've got all these values for how to change the font and stuff. Let's set the font size to 100. So we want this text to be kind of big. And we want it to be aligned right. So underneath paragraph alignment, select the rightmost button on the first set of 3 buttons there. But since we changed the font size, we see we don't see that the text there anymore, and that's because it's too big for this little rectangle. So let's change that rectangle. What we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to another tool here, the Rect Transform tool. So up at the top where we have our hand and the move tool and the rotation tool, there's also this Rect tool, the second from the right. And when we select that, we see we have these blue circles appear on our text object. So now we can just click and drag on those circles, and we can just resize it, and we want to make it actually pretty big. And let's change the new text value. So what we can do is just click on where it says new text in the component, and we'll just put a 0 there as a placeholder. Actually, let's put 0, 0, 0, 3 zeros. So that's how we can set what the actual text of the object is. So once we have that, actually we want to align it to the bottom too. So let's select this button on the very right of your paragraph alignment as well. So both of those buttons should be on the very right. Okay, now the other thing we can do with this Rect Transform tool is we can click inside of this rectangle, not where we see this little cross, and not where you see this little ghost donut. We want to click somewhere else in this rectangle, and you see I can like position it inside of our canvas. So now what I want to do is I want to drag it all the way to the bottom right, and it should kind of snap there. Now we have our text here, but we want to, let's put a little kind of background just so that we can see these numbers better in the game. So I'm going to go back over to our canvas, and I'm going to right click on our canvas object, and I'm going to say go down to UI and then to image, and you should see it creates this white box. So by default, Unity gives us a white box when we create an image. We can add our own image, like as a texture. If I authored something in Photoshop, I could put this in our image and I could make it really cool, but I didn't have time to do that, so we're just using this white box. So let's drag that down to the right corner as well. It's going to be on top. So here's something interesting about the canvas in Unity. The order of your objects in the hierarchy matters. So it's kind of like Photoshop layers, where things that are in different layers will be drawn on top of each other. But the canvas works backwards from how Photoshop works. In Unity, things that are on the bottom will be drawn on top. So what we want to do is take our image and drag it so that we see a little blue line on top of our speedometer. And now we see that we've flipped the layers. The numbers are on top of the white. And we can just drag our white box so that it kind of, the numbers fit inside of it nicely. And we're going to apply some code to the speedometer. So let's select the speedometer from the hierarchy. And I'm just going to drag, there should be speedometer script that I can drag onto this as a component. So now this speedometer it's expecting, it wants this car rigid body. It's saying, well, I'm going to tell you how fast something's going. Give me something to tell you how fast it's going. So let's drag the player car from our hierarchy onto our car rigid body value there. So now that should work how it is. So we can save and test. And now you should see that number change when your car moves. And you'll also notice that our car is capped at 100. We'll exit out of play mode. Let's take a look at audio. We're going to focus on the basics here to round it out. Let's go to our import files. And we'll go to number 5, audio. And we'll import that. And just bring everything from in there. So now if we go back out to our assets, we have a new folder, audio, and let's go into SFX. So that's sound effects. So we're interested in this ship horn. We can test these out by clicking on them, and then in the bottom right you see these waveforms, and then on top of those waveforms you'll see a play button. So we're going to play that sound when we score a goal. So what we can do here is let's go to our hierarchy and we'll go create empty, and we'll rename that to audio. And then let's right click on that. From that list, go to audio source. So it's created an audio source inside of our audio game object. And let's rename this audio source to ship horn. And we can drag our ship horn waveform onto where it says audio clip, none audio clip in our inspector. And if we save and test this, we'll see it just it plays at the start. But that's not what we want. We want it to play when we score a goal. So let's exit out of play mode. And the thing that controls it playing at the start is this play on awake. So if we uncheck that, that's not going to play at the very beginning anymore. But now we need to tell it when to play. And we can do that with the same thing that we did with the game manager. So let's select our game manager. And we have our list of things. So far we have the soccer ball and the car resetting. Let's click on the plus sign to add another one. And then we're going to drag our ship horn game object onto that. And then where it says no function, we'll click and we'll go to audio source, and then we'll find play. Play, it's near the bottom. So that's how you can use events to trigger things on other objects. So now if we were to score a goal, it'll play that ship horn. I don't know if you guys have much audio on yours. So let's go back out Do you guys want to do, I'll give you the option of one more thing we can do. Do you guys want to create an intro cutscene? Do you want to add do you want to add a boost function to our car so we can go faster? Or do you want to, we can add headlights to our car, or we can add background music. You guys want boost? We'll do boost for now, and then we'll see if we have time. So let's go. I created another script. So if we go to our assets, scripts, we have our player car script right there. So if I select player car from the from the hierarchy, I'm going to open the prefab. We're going to edit the car prefab. What we need to do is, if we look on our inspector, we see car user control. This is the one that came with the Unity standard assets. We want to get rid of that component because the script I created does the same thing that does, but it does more. So let's remove this car user control by clicking on the gear button and then remove component. And now we'll drag the player car script onto this game object. Let's add some effects to this. So if we go down to our assets again, and we'll go to standard assets, and we'll go to particle systems, and then prefabs. Particle systems, I'll just go over briefly what particle systems are. When you create, when you're wanting to represent 3D objects that are solid objects, you create meshes. But when you want to create effects or like things that aren't solid objects, like smoke or fire or things that are kind of harder to represent as a mesh, you can use particle effects. And basically what it is a bunch of images that Unity will create. It'll position all these little images, and you can create different effects with them. We can get a better understanding of what this means if we just create a new particle effect. So let's go into our hierarchy and just say create effects particle system. Now you'll see a bunch of little just circles just like blasting out of our car, and it doesn't make sense. But something like this, this is kind of the default particle system. How about let's just delete that particle system. How about just watch my screen, and I'll just show you something here, just to give you guys an idea. So I'm going to go, I'm out in the main scene here. I'm going to go, I'm going to create particle system, and I'm going to reset the position, and I'm going to focus on it. Now this thing has like so many options here. I can't go over them, but I'll just show you kind of what we can do with particle systems. So I'm going to go to shape. I'm going to change it to box. And you see how like everything I'm doing here is changing how these particles are going. I'm going to drag this up to the top. I'm going to go to emission. I'm going to say 200. Now we've got like lots of these little guys, and I'm going to say Start speed 0, gravity 1, and now we've got snow. So if I test this out, it'll take a second for the snow to come, but now we've got snow in our game. So that's something you can do with particle systems. We're going to use a particle system that creates a fire effect. I'm going to delete my particle system here. Let's go, so you guys should still be in the car. I'm going to go back there. You'll see in the prefabs here, we have this, the last one is wildfire. Let's drag wildfire into our scene here. And you'll see it doesn't give us anything. The other one was shooting particles out. But if I click on this, if I have the move tool selected, and I'm just going to move this around, now you're going to see this is what we're going to be using to give us some cool effects for when we boost. So you see how like this is a way more intense particle system than the one I just created there. But this is, you can kind of see that like particle systems are very powerful for creating different types of effects. And these prefabs in the Unity standard assets, they give you a bunch of different ones. So I'd suggest you take a look at those. So let's, what we're going to do is we're going to take our wildfire and put it into our particles game object. We only want one right now. What I'm going to do is let's click on the Y button in our gizmo. So the green one. So now we should have a top view of our car. And let's select our wildfire, and we will move it so it's kind of behind, so it's kind of where our back wheel is, one of our back wheels. Let's move it a bit forward so it's kind of more near the middle of our car, but it's in line with our wheel. Let's just duplicate that wildfire object, and then we're just going to drag it across so it's under the other tire. So now if we back out of here to our scene, and we save and test, now we see we have fire coming out the back of our car. But we want it to come out when we're boosting, not just when we're driving around. So if we exit out of play mode and go back to our player car and open the prefab. So we want it to play the fire when we boost. So let's select the player car at the very top. And we're going to scroll down to where we have our player car component. And at the very bottom, there's this boost particles drop down. So we can open that up. And it should be size 0. We want to change it to size 2. And then we see that now it has 2 things that say none particle system. And we just want to drag our 2 wildfires onto those 2 options. So now it'll play that particle system effect when we boost, but I'll bring your attention to the player car script where it says boost input axis. Remember how our resettable script we created, we had it set to submit as our input axis, and now we have this different one that says boost. And you should see at the very bottom of Unity, argument exception in this red, with this little red stop sign at the very bottom corner. It says argument exception input axis boost is not set up. So we're saying this player car is waiting for the player to hit the boost button, but Unity's saying there is no boost button. So let's go and make a boost button. So let's go to Edit, Project Settings. And we should still be in our input axes thing here. What we're going to do is just commandeer one of these other ones, because there's all these different inputs that we don't need right now. We're just doing the resetting and the boosting. Let's take this jump one. So there's a jump, and it should say positive button space. So we just want to, let's change the name where it says jump. So we want to keep space, but change up top where it says jump, change it to boost with a capital B. So now our game doesn't have a way to jump. We're not using a jump button, but we're using a boost button. And now Unity should be happy with that. So when we hit the space bar, we should boost. So we can exit out of the prefab view if you're in there, and then you can save and test. And you should be able to, when you press space, so the particles are set to only play if you're over 100. Okay. Do you guys, let's just export our game to an executable, and we'll export it how it is now. So let's go to File, Build Settings, and we'll click on, at the very bottom it says Player Settings. So it's opened up a new thing in our inspector. This is all the things, options that we can give it for exporting our game. And you'll see back here in the build settings, we have the different platforms that we can export to as well. But a lot of those require SDKs or licenses or stuff. But we can export to PC here. So let's close this build settings. Let's go to our import files again. In the Windows Explorer, we're going to go to our import files where we get our stuff. So we're just going to go to the last one, 6, compiling. There's this export Unity thing. Just double click on that one. And we're just getting these 2 images here. So you can import those 2. And let's go out to our assets and textures and export. So I created a banner and an icon. Let's go back to File, Build Settings, and then Player Settings. And we'll close this window again. Now over here on the right, let's drag this soccer ball to where it says default icon, and then it says none texture 2D. And now we're going to go down and open up splash image. So there's a splash image option down here. We click on that. That's going to open up a bunch of different options here. We're just going to look at the top one where it says Application Config dialog. Let's drag this other image over to that. Now we can select the 2 images we have here. Let's just click one and then Control click the other one. So we have both of these images selected in our project. And now we're going to change them both texture type. Change that to Sprite 2D and UI. Those are both going to function. They're not going to be textures. They're going to be just straight images. So Unity is going to export those as part of our build. So it's going to use that icon for like the desktop icon and stuff. So let's go back to File, Build Settings. And we're going to click the button on the right that says Add Open Scenes. So that's just saying that the scene we have created is going to be packaged into our final game. So if you think about it, we've downloaded other scenes from the standard assets and the muscle car and stuff. But this is the way of saying we only want to export this scene that we have as our main scene that we've been working in. And so you can have other test scenes, you can have lots of different scenes in your game to test stuff out, or lots of different levels. And so you'd want to add all those different levels in to your final build. But so now let's just go down to the very bottom and click on Build. And let's just create a new folder and call it Builds, capital B. And so we'll click on our Builds folder and we'll say Select Folder with the Select Folder button. And so now it's exporting our game. So that's going to take a few, about 30 seconds. It's exported it, and so now this is our game. And so you can double click on the soccer cars exe, and now it has this like kind of settings dialog, and you can hit play.